Welcome to a journey into the heart of horror, where the lines between reality and nightmare are blurred. In this chilling compilation, we bring you 10 terrifying tales that will leave you on the edge of your seat. From abandoned asylums to cursed carnivals, each story is a descent into the darkest corners of the human psyche. Prepare to face your deepest fears as we delve into the unknown, where terror lurks in every shadow. So sit back, but be warned, once you enter this world, there's no turning back. Beyond the battlefield. As I donned my Civil War uniform and stepped into the historical reenactment camp, the world around me transformed. The modern world receded, replaced by the sights and sounds of a bygone era. I was Alex, a reenactor who had always been fascinated by history, and this camp was my passion. For a few days each year, I could leave behind the stresses of modern life and immerse myself in the past. The camp was nestled in a secluded valley, surrounded by rolling hills and dense forests. The air was crisp and clean, filled with the scent of wood smoke and canvas. As I walked through the camp, I saw fellow reenactors busy with their daily routines, some cooking over open fires, others practicing drills, and a few repairing equipment. It was a community bound together by a shared love of history and a desire to relive it. At first, everything seemed normal. The days passed in a blur of battles reenacted, meals shared, and stories told around the campfire. But as the week wore on, I began to notice strange occurrences. Some of the reenactors would speak in character even when not in costume, their modern identities slowly fading away. They would refer to each other by their historical names, and their mannerisms would change, becoming more archaic. I dismissed these observations as mere enthusiasm, but as the visions began, I realized that something more sinister was at play. I would see glimpses of battles not reenacted, of men and women who had lived and died in a time long past. The visions were vivid, filled with the sounds of cannons and the cries of the wounded. And when they faded, I felt a sense of disorientation, as if I had truly been there. As the days passed, the visions grew stronger, and I began to feel a creeping sense of dread. It was as if I was losing my grip on reality, becoming more and more entrenched in the character I portrayed. I would find myself thinking in the language of the Civil War era, using phrases and words that were not my own. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw not Alex, but Private James Wilson, a soldier from a century ago. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the supernatural. It was the fear of losing my identity, of being trapped in the past. I tried to hold on to my modern self, but it was slipping away, consumed by the character I had created. One night, as we sat around the campfire, a fellow reenactor spoke of a battle that had not been reenacted. He spoke with a conviction that was unnerving, as if he had truly been there. And when I looked around at the others, I saw that they too were lost in their characters, their eyes reflecting a deep sadness and a longing for a time long past. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth. We were not just reenacting history, we were becoming it. The lines between reality and fantasy were blurring, and we were losing ourselves in the process. As the final battle of the reenactment approached, I felt a sense of desperation. I knew I had to escape, to break free from the character that was consuming me. But as I looked around at my comrades, I saw that they were no longer my friends. They were soldiers from another era, bound together by a shared fate. The battle was intense, the sounds and smells overwhelming. And when it ended, I found myself standing alone, my uniform torn and my mind reeling. I looked around, but the camp was empty, the tents and equipment gone. I was left with nothing but the echoes of the past, and the realization that I was no longer Alex. I was Private James Wilson, forever trapped in a war that had ended long ago. As I walked away from the battlefield, the world around me began to fade into darkness. I knew that I would never find my way back to the present, that I was doomed to relive the horrors of the Civil War for eternity. The fear that had gripped my heart was not just of the supernatural. It was the fear of losing myself, of being consumed by the very history I had once sought to reenact. And as the darkness closed in, I heard the sound of cannons in the distance, the cries of the wounded, and the rustle of leaves underfoot. I was no longer in the present. I was beyond the battlefield, lost in a past that would never let me go. The shadows of the cloister. As I walked through the stone corridors of our medieval monastery, the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the soft chanting of my brethren in the chapel. I was Brother Edward, a young monk dedicated to a life of prayer and service. Our order was known for its piety and devotion, but whispers of heresy had begun to circulate among the villagers. They accused us of harboring dark secrets, of practicing forbidden rituals in the dead of night. I dismissed these rumors as mere superstition, but as the days passed, I began to notice strange occurrences. Books would be misplaced in the library, and the scriptorium would be found in disarray. Some of the older monks seemed distant, their eyes clouded with a deep concern. I attributed these changes to the pressure of the accusations, but a nagging sense of unease lingered in the back of my mind. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the cloister, I was summoned by the abbot. His expression was grave, his eyes sunken with worry. He led me to a hidden chamber deep within the monastery, a room I had never known existed. Inside, I found a small, ornate box adorned with symbols I did not recognize. The abbot's voice was barely above a whisper as he explained that this was a relic of great power, one that had been passed down through our order for generations. It was said to hold the key to unlocking divine secrets, but at a terrible cost. As I looked at the box, I felt a shiver run down my spine. There was something malevolent about it, something that seemed to draw the light out of the room. The abbot warned me that it was not to be used, that its power was too great for mortal men to wield. But as the accusations of heresy grew louder and the villagers began to threaten our very existence, some of the monks became desperate. They believed that the artifact could be used to prove our innocence, to show the world that we were not heretics but guardians of a sacred truth. I was skeptical, but as the pressure mounted, I found myself drawn into their plans to use the artifact, hoping to summon a divine presence that would vindicate us. But as we gathered in the hidden chamber, the air thick with anticipation, I realized that we were making a terrible mistake. The ritual began, and the room seemed to darken as if the shadows themselves were moving. The symbols on the box began to glow with an otherworldly light, and I felt a presence stirring, a malevolent entity that seemed to be awakening from a deep slumber. As the ritual reached its climax, the entity manifested. It was a darkness so profound that it seemed to have a form, a presence that filled the room with an unspeakable horror. The monks around me were consumed by it, their eyes turning black as coal, their voices chanting in unison with a voice that was not their own. I tried to flee, but it was too late. The darkness had me, pulling me into its depths with an irresistible force. I felt my faith crumbling, my sense of reality unraveling. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of death. It was the fear of being consumed by darkness, of losing the very essence of my being. As the darkness closed in, I saw visions of our monastery's past, of the secrets that had been hidden for so long. The artifact was not a tool of divine power. It was a key to unlocking hell itself, and we, in our desperation, had unleashed a horror beyond comprehension. When the ritual ended, the monastery was silent once more. But it was not the silence of peace, it was the silence of death. The monks who had participated in the ritual were gone, consumed by the very darkness they had sought to control. And I, Brother Edward, was left alone, haunted by the knowledge of what we had done. The villagers found me days later, curled up in a corner of the hidden chamber, my mind shattered by the horrors I had witnessed. They took me away, locking me in a cell, accusing me of heresy and madness. But I knew the truth, that the real horror was not the accusations or the darkness, it was the fear of losing faith, of being consumed by the shadows that lurked within every human heart. Years later, when I was finally released from my prison, I returned to the ruins of our monastery. The building stood as a testament to the tragedy that had unfolded within its walls. And as I walked through the empty corridors, I felt the presence of the malevolent entity still lingering, waiting for its next victim. The fear that I had faced in that hidden chamber had never truly left me. It was a fear of being consumed by darkness, of losing the light of faith in a world filled with shadows. And as I looked up at the sky, I knew that I would never be free from the horrors that I had unleashed, that the shadows of the cloister would haunt me forever. The awakening earth. As I stepped into the ancient burial ground, the air was heavy with an unsettling silence. The trees seemed to lean in, their branches like skeletal fingers reaching out to snare the unwary. I am Dr. Rachel Lee, an archaeologist with a passion for uncovering the secrets of the past. This site was a treasure trove of historical significance, a place where the ancient dead lay undisturbed for centuries. The burial ground was nestled deep in the heart of a dense forest, far from the prying eyes of modern civilization. The earth was covered in a thick layer of moss and ferns, and the air was filled with the scent of damp soil and decaying leaves. It was a place of tranquility, yet it seemed to vibrate with an otherworldly energy. At first, our excavation was met with excitement and anticipation. The team worked tirelessly, uncovering artifacts and remains that told the story of a long-forgotten culture. But as the days passed, strange occurrences began to plague us. Tools would go missing, and strange noises could be heard in the night. Whispers, creaks, and groans that seemed to emanate from the earth itself. I dismissed these events as mere superstition, the product of tired minds and overactive imaginations. But as the occurrences grew more frequent and more intense, I began to feel a creeping sense of unease. It was as if the land itself was awakening, responding to our presence with a malevolent intent. One night, as I walked through the forest, I stumbled upon an ancient ritual site. The air was thick with an electric tension, and I felt a presence watching me, a presence that seemed to emanate from the very earth beneath my feet. I knew then that we had disturbed something that was meant to remain undisturbed. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the supernatural. It was the fear of desecrating sacred ground, of facing the wrath of those who had lain undisturbed for so long. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the evidence was mounting. The spirits of the buried were not just restless, they were awakening, reclaiming their land, and punishing those who dared to disturb their rest. As the days turned into weeks, the occurrences grew more intense. Team members began to vanish, only to be found later with no memory of where they had been. They would speak of visions, of ancient battles, of rituals performed under the light of the full moon. And they would speak of a figure that seemed to be watching us from the shadows. I knew then that we had to leave, to abandon the excavation and flee from the wrath of the awakened dead. But it was too late. The spirits had us in their sights, and they would not rest until we had paid the price for our intrusion. One night, as the moon hung low in the sky, we were surrounded by an unseen force. The air was thick with an electric tension, and the earth seemed to tremble beneath our feet. I saw the figure then, a towering presence with eyes that burned like embers from a long-dead fire. The figure spoke in a voice that was both ancient and eternal, its words echoing through the forest like a curse. "You have disturbed the rest of the dead," it said. "Now you will join them." As the figure raised its hand, the earth seemed to open up, swallowing us whole. I felt myself being pulled down into the darkness of the ancient burial ground. And as the earth closed over me, I knew that I would never escape, that I would be trapped forever in a place where the dead did not rest. The last thing I saw was the figure, standing above me, its eyes burning with an ancient wrath. And then everything went black. When the rescue team finally found me, I was alone, buried beneath the earth. The excavation site was abandoned, the equipment left behind, as if the team had vanished into thin air. I was the only survivor, left to tell the tale of a horror beyond comprehension. As I looked back at the forest, I knew that I would never be the same. The fear of desecrating sacred ground had become a reality, and I had faced the wrath of the awakened dead. The memory of that place would haunt me forever, a reminder of the horrors that await those who dare to disturb the rest of the ancient dead. Years later, When I finally found the courage to return to that place, I saw that the forest had reclaimed the burial ground. The trees had grown taller, their branches weaving together to form a canopy that blocked out the sun. And in the center of it all, I saw a figure, standing watch, waiting for the next intruder to disturb the rest of the dead. I knew then that I had been given a second chance, a chance to warn others of the dangers that lurked in the ancient earth. But as I turned to leave, I felt the ground beneath me shift, and I heard the whispers of the dead, calling me back to join them in their eternal slumber. The shadows of Ravenswood. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped out of the carriage and onto the winding driveway of Ravenswood Manor. The Victorian-era mansion loomed before me, its grandeur and beauty tempered by an aura of melancholy. I was Emily, the new governess for the 2 children of the reclusive Mr. Edward Blackstone. The position had been advertised as a refuge for a young woman seeking solitude and stability, but as I gazed up at the manor, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was stepping into a world of secrets and shadows. The interior of the manor was just as imposing as its exterior, with high ceilings, intricate moldings, and walls adorned with faded portraits. The air was thick with the scent of old books and dust, and the silence was oppressive, punctuated only by the creaking of the wooden floorboards beneath my feet. My charges, Master James and Miss Sophia, were polite but distant, their eyes seeming to hold a depth of sorrow that belied their youth. Their father, Mr. Blackstone, was a man consumed by grief, his eyes sunken and his smile a rare sight. He spoke little of his family's past, but the whispers among the staff hinted at a history of tragic events that had left the family scarred. As the days passed, I began to notice strange occurrences. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I dismissed these as the typical creaks and groans of an old house, but the frequency and intensity of these events soon made me question my own sanity. One evening, while reading to the children, I felt a chill run down my spine. The fire in the hearth seemed to flicker in rhythm with my heartbeat, and I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just beyond the edge of the light. The children, however, seemed oblivious to it all, their eyes fixed on me with an unnerving intensity. As the nights drew in, the occurrences grew more frequent and more intense. I would find myself in rooms I didn't remember entering, with no recollection of how I got there. The portraits on the walls seemed to change, their subjects' expressions shifting from serene to sinister. And then there were the whispers. Soft at first, but growing louder, more urgent. They were whispers of names, of events, of tragedies that had unfolded within these very walls. I began to research the history of Ravenswood, poring over old diaries and letters. The stories spoke of a family torn apart by greed, jealousy, and tragedy. A fire had claimed the lives of Mr. Blackstone's wife and eldest son, leaving him a broken man. But as I delved deeper, I realized that the ghosts of Ravenswood were not just haunting the house, they were manipulating the living. The children would often speak of their mother and brother, as if they were still present. They would play games that seemed to recreate the tragic events of the past, and I began to feel like a pawn in a sinister game. Mr. Blackstone, too, seemed to be under some sort of influence, his actions becoming more erratic and detached. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the supernatural. It was the fear of being trapped in a cycle of tragedy, of losing control to forces beyond my understanding. I knew I had to escape, but the manor seemed to have a hold on me, drawing me deeper into its labyrinthine corridors and dark secrets. One night, as the storm raged outside, I stumbled upon a hidden room deep in the manor's basement. Inside, I found a series of letters and diaries belonging to the family members who had died in the fire. As I read through them, I realized that the tragedy was not an accident. It was a culmination of the family's dark past, a past that was now repeating itself. The children, it seemed, were being manipulated by the ghosts to recreate the events leading up to the fire. And I, unwittingly, had become a part of this twisted play. The whispers, the movements, the changing portraits, all were part of a larger scheme to ensure that history repeated itself. As I emerged from the hidden room, I felt the weight of the manor's secrets bearing down on me. The storm outside seemed to mirror the turmoil within me, and I knew I had to act. I gathered the children and made a desperate bid to leave the manor, to break the cycle of tragedy that had ensnared us all. But as we reached the front door, I found it locked, the key gone. The whispers grew louder, more urgent, and I realized that we were trapped. The ghosts of Ravenswood had ensured that we would play out their tragic past, that we would become the latest chapter in their haunting tale. In that moment, I understood that I was not just fighting against the supernatural. I was fighting against the darkness within myself. The fear of losing control, of being consumed by the shadows of Ravenswood, was overwhelming. And as the flames began to lick at the windows, recreating the tragedy of years past, I knew that I was doomed to become a part of the manor's eternal cycle of horror. The last thing I saw was the face of Mr. Blackstone, his eyes black as coal, his smile twisted in a grimace of despair. And then everything went black. When the fire was finally extinguished, the manor lay in ruins, its secrets and terrors locked within its charred remains. But the legend of Ravenswood lived on, a cautionary tale of a family trapped in a cycle of tragedy, and the governess who became its latest victim. And if you listen closely, on certain nights when the wind is just right, you can still hear the whispers of Ravenswood, beckoning you to join in their eternal dance of horror and despair. The Carnival of Shadows. As I stepped into the vibrant world of wonders and marvels, a 19th century carnival, the air was alive with the smell of sugar and smoke, the sound of laughter and music. I was Lily, a new trapeze artist, eager to join the ranks of the performers who seemed to defy gravity and delight the crowds with their daring feats. The carnival was a place of wonder, a traveling spectacle that brought joy to every town it visited. At first, everything seemed magical. The performers were a tight-knit family, welcoming me with open arms. There was Marcus, the charming strongman, Alara, the enigmatic fortune-teller, and Jasper, the clown, whose smile seemed to hide 1,000 secrets. But as the days passed, I began to notice strange occurrences. Equipment would go missing, and some of the performers would act strangely, as if they were being controlled by an unseen force. I dismissed these observations as mere paranoia, but the feeling of being watched never left me. It was as if there was a presence lurking just beyond the edge of the carnival, a presence that seemed to be pulling the strings from behind the scenes. One night, as I was preparing for my performance, I stumbled upon a hidden tent deep in the carnival grounds. Inside, I found a series of old photographs and newspaper clippings, each telling a story of tragedy and loss. The performers were not just entertainers, they were hiding dark secrets, secrets that seemed to be bound to the carnival itself. As I delved deeper into the mystery, I discovered that the carnival was controlled by a mysterious figure known only as the Ringmaster. No one seemed to know much about him, but his presence was felt everywhere. He was the one who decided who joined the carnival and who left, the one who controlled the performances and the lives of the performers. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the unknown. It was the fear of being trapped in a world of illusions, of losing control to a sinister force that seemed to manipulate everything. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination, but the evidence was mounting. The performers were not just performing, they were living out a script written by the Ringmaster, a script that seemed to be changing them, turning them into puppets with no free will. As the nights passed, the performances became more intense, more surreal. The crowds seemed to grow larger, their faces twisted in a mixture of awe and terror. And I, Lily, was becoming a part of it all, my trapeze acts becoming more daring, more reckless. One evening, as the carnival was closing down, I saw him, the Ringmaster. He was a figure shrouded in shadows, his face hidden behind a mask of painted smiles. He spoke in a voice that was both commanding and mesmerizing, his words weaving a spell that seemed to bind me to the carnival forever. "You are now a part of our family, Lily," he said, "and once you are in, there is no escape." As the days turned into weeks, I realized that I was trapped. The carnival was not just a place of wonder. It was a prison, a world of illusions where reality was twisted and distorted. And I was just another performer, another puppet in the ringmaster's grand show. The night of the final performance arrived, and the carnival was ablaze with lights and music. The crowd was larger than ever, their faces aglow with excitement and fear, and as I took to the trapeze, I felt the ringmaster's presence, guiding me, controlling me. The performance was a blur of color and sound, a whirlwind of movement and music. But as I reached the climax, I saw something that made my blood run cold. The performers were not just performing, they were transforming, their bodies contorting into impossible shapes, their faces twisted in a mixture of agony and ecstasy. And then, I saw the ringmaster, standing at the center of it all, his mask removed, revealing a face that was not human. He was the master of this twisted world, the one who had been pulling the strings all along. As the performance ended and the crowd dispersed, I realized that I was not alone. The performers, now fully transformed, surrounded me, their eyes empty, their movements mechanical. I was trapped, forever bound to the carnival, a prisoner in a world of illusions. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the ringmaster. It was the fear of losing myself, of becoming just another puppet in his twisted show. And as the carnival packed up and moved on to its next destination, I knew that I would never be free, that I would forever be trapped in the carnival of shadows, a world where reality was just an illusion and terror was the only truth. Years later, when people spoke of wonders and marvels, they whispered of a carnival that was cursed, a place where performers disappeared and never returned. And if you listened closely, you could still hear the sound of laughter and music, the sound of a trapeze artist soaring through the air, forever trapped in a world of illusions, forever bound to the ringmaster's twisted will. The shadows of Blackwood Asylum. When stepped out of my car and onto the crumbling asphalt of Blackwood Asylum's parking lot, a chill ran down my spine. The once majestic building loomed before me, its windows like empty eyes staring back. I had always been drawn to the darker corners of history, and Blackwood Asylum was the epitome of such places. As a historian, I had spent years researching its past, but nothing could have prepared me for the eerie silence that enveloped me now. I was here to uncover the truth behind the asylum's abrupt closure in the early 20th century. Rumors of inhumane treatments and mysterious disappearances had long shrouded the place in mystery. My initial skepticism about the supernatural tales that circulated among the locals was slowly giving way to a sense of unease. The isolation of the asylum, nestled deep in the woods, seemed to amplify every sound, making me feel like I was being watched. As I entered the main building, the creaking of the old wooden floorboards beneath my feet echoed through the empty halls. The air was thick with dust and the scent of decay. I began my exploration, camera and notebook in hand, documenting every detail. The walls were adorned with peeling paint and faded signs, remnants of a time when this place was bustling with life. Now it was a tomb, a testament to the horrors that had once unfolded within its walls. My first few days were uneventful, filled with research and exploration. However, as the nights drew in, I started to experience strange occurrences. Doors would slam shut on their own, and I would catch glimpses of movement out of the corner of my eye. At first, I dismissed these as the typical creaks and groans of an old building, but the frequency and intensity of these events soon made me question my own sanity. One evening, while reviewing my notes in the dimly lit library, I stumbled upon an old logbook belonging to one of the former doctors. The entries were cryptic, but they hinted at experiments that had been conducted on the patients. The more I read, the more my skepticism turned to horror. These weren't just rumors, they were documented facts. The patients had been subjected to inhumane treatments, their minds and bodies pushed to the brink of madness. As I delved deeper into the logbook, the shadows around me seemed to grow longer and darker. I felt a presence closing in, as if the spirits of the former patients were watching me, waiting for me to uncover their story. The fear of being trapped and experimented on began to grip me, making every step feel like a betrayal. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just my imagination playing tricks. But the occurrences grew more frequent and more intense. I would find myself in rooms I didn't remember entering, with no recollection of how I got there. The lines between reality and madness began to blur, and I started to wonder if I was losing my grip on sanity. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispers. They were soft at first, but they grew louder, more urgent. I couldn't make out the words, but the desperation in the voices was palpable. I tried to convince myself it was just the wind or my imagination, but deep down I knew it was something more. I decided to explore the asylum's basement, a place I had avoided until now. The stairs creaked beneath my feet as I descended into the darkness. The air was colder here, heavier with the weight of secrets. I fumbled for my flashlight and turned it on, casting flickering shadows on the walls. As I moved deeper into the basement, I stumbled upon a room filled with old medical equipment. It was then that I saw them, photographs of patients, their eyes blacked out, their faces twisted in agony. The realization hit me like a wave. These were the people who had been subjected to the inhumane experiments. Their spirits were not just haunting this place, they were seeking revenge. Suddenly the whispers stopped. The silence was oppressive, a heavy blanket that suffocated me. I knew I had to get out, but as I turned to leave, I found that the door was no longer there. The walls had shifted, trapping me in a labyrinth of corridors and rooms that seemed to stretch on forever. Panic set in as I realized I was lost. The fear of being trapped and experimented on by vengeful spirits consumed me. I ran, my footsteps echoing through the empty halls, but every door led to more corridors, more rooms. I was trapped in a never-ending nightmare. And then, everything went black. When I came to, I was lying on the floor, my head throbbing. The room was silent, the whispers gone. But as I looked around, I saw that I was not alone. The photographs from the basement were scattered around me, the faces of the patients staring back. It was then that I understood the horrifying truth. I had become a part of their story, a victim of the same experiments that had driven them to madness. As I stumbled out of the asylum, the sun was rising over the horizon. The building loomed behind me, its secrets and horrors locked within its crumbling walls. I knew I would never be the same, that a part of me would always be trapped in those endless corridors, haunted by the shadows of Blackwood Asylum. The drive back to civilization was a blur. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that the spirits of the former patients were following me. When I finally reached my home, I locked the door behind me, trying to shut out the darkness that had seeped into my soul. But as I looked around my familiar surroundings, I realized that the horror wasn't just in the asylum. It was within me. The fear of being trapped and experimented on still lingered, a constant reminder of the terror I had faced. And as I glanced at the photographs I had brought with me, now scattered on my desk, I saw something that made my blood run cold. My own face, blacked out among the patients. In that moment, I knew that I had never truly escaped Blackwood Asylum. The shadows had followed me home, and I was now a part of their haunting, forever trapped in a world of madness and terror. The devouring storm. As I stood on the porch of our farm, the vast expanse of the Great Plains stretched out before me like a barren sea. The once lush fields were now nothing but dust and desolation, a testament to the relentless drought that had gripped our town for years. I was Sarah, the daughter of a farmer, and our livelihood was slowly being consumed by the dust storms that swept through our land like malevolent spirits. The town was a small, tight-knit community where everyone knew each other's struggles and fears. But as the dust storms grew more frequent and more intense, a sense of desperation began to creep in. People were losing their homes, their crops, and their hope. The dust seemed to seep into every aspect of our lives, choking the life out of us. At first, I dismissed the strange occurrences as mere superstition. People would speak of seeing shadowy figures in the storms, of hearing whispers on the wind. But as the weeks passed, the sightings grew more frequent and the whispers louder. It was as if the dust itself was alive, moving with a purpose that seemed to be drawing us deeper into despair. One night, As a particularly fierce storm rolled in, I saw it, a figure standing just beyond the edge of the farm, its presence seeming to draw the dust towards it like a magnet. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, but the image lingered in my mind, haunting me. As the days turned into weeks, the storms grew stronger, and the figures began to appear more often. They seemed to be feeding on our despair, growing more substantial with each passing day. I realized then that the dust storms were not just a natural disaster. They were a harbinger of something supernatural, something that fed on hopelessness. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of the storms, it was the fear of losing everything. Our farm, our home, our very way of life. And as I looked around at the desolate landscape, I felt the weight of that fear bearing down on me. One evening, as the sun set over the ruins of our town, I decided to confront the truth. I walked out into the storm, the dust stinging my eyes and choking my lungs, and then I saw them, figures all around me, their faces twisted in a grimace of hunger. They were not just apparitions, they were entities, beings that fed on our despair. And as I stood there, frozen in terror, I realized that we were not just fighting against the dust storms. We were fighting against a force that sought to consume us all. The storm raged on, the dust swirling around me like a living thing. I felt myself being pulled towards the entities, felt my hope slipping away. And in that moment, I knew that I was doomed, that we were all doomed. As the storm finally began to subside, I stumbled back to our farm, my heart heavy with despair. The entities were gone, but I knew they would return, drawn by the hopelessness that seemed to permeate every corner of our town. In the days that followed, the town descended into chaos. People began to turn on each other, their desperation and fear boiling over into violence. And I, Sarah, was left alone, haunted by the knowledge of what we had faced. The dust storms continued to rage, but they were no longer just a natural disaster. They were a reminder of the supernatural forces that lurked beyond the edge of our reality. And as I looked out at the desolate landscape, I knew that I would never be free from the fear of being consumed by hopelessness, of losing everything to the devouring storm. Years later, when the dust storms finally subsided and the rains returned to our parched land, the town was left to pick up the pieces of its shattered existence. But the memory of those entities, of the supernatural forces that had fed on our despair, lingered. And as I walked through the newly green fields, I couldn't shake the feeling that they were still out there, waiting for the next storm, waiting for the next wave of hopelessness to consume us all. The fear that I had faced in those dust storms had never truly left me. It was a fear of losing everything, of being consumed by the very darkness that seemed to lurk within every human heart. And as I looked up at the sky, I knew that I would never be free from the shadows of the past, that the devouring storm would always be a part of me, a reminder of the horrors that await us in the darkest corners of our world. The shadow of the plague. As I walked through the narrow streets of our small village, the air was thick with fear and suspicion. The Black Death had been ravaging Europe for years, and our village was no exception. Death lurked in every shadow, claiming lives with merciless efficiency. I was Thomas, a young apprentice to the village healer, Alara. She was a wise and kind woman, respected by many, but feared by others who saw her knowledge of herbs and medicine as witchcraft. Our village was a tight-knit community, where everyone knew each other's names and stories. But as the plague spread, paranoia began to creep in. Neighbors turned against neighbors, and the once strong bonds of trust began to fray. Alara and I worked tirelessly to help those afflicted, but our efforts were often met with suspicion and hostility. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the village, I noticed a change in Alara's demeanor. She was more withdrawn than usual, her eyes clouded with a deep concern. We were in her small cottage, surrounded by the pungent aroma of herbs and the soft glow of candles. She handed me a small pouch filled with dried plants. "Thomas, I need you to deliver this to the Wilsons," she said, her voice low and urgent. "Their daughter is ill, and this might help." As I took the pouch, I felt a shiver run down my spine. The Wilsons were among those who had begun to accuse Alara of witchcraft, claiming that her remedies were curses in disguise. I knew that delivering the medicine would put me at risk, but I trusted Alara and her intentions. The walk to the Wilsons' house was short, but the fear that gripped my heart made every step feel like an eternity. When I arrived, I found the family huddled together, their faces filled with a mix of fear and anger. They refused to take the medicine, spitting at my feet and calling me a servant of the devil. I returned to Alara's cottage, my heart heavy with worry. She listened to my tale, her expression grave. For the first time, I saw a glimmer of fear in her eyes, a fear not of death, but of being accused and punished for trying to help. As the days passed, the accusations against Alara grew louder. People began to whisper that she was summoning the plague, that her remedies were actually spreading the disease. I knew it wasn't true, but the fear of being accused alongside her was suffocating. The villagers were becoming more aggressive, their actions driven by desperation and ignorance. One night, under the light of a full moon, I followed Alara into the forest. She moved with a purpose, her steps swift and silent. We reached a clearing, and in the center, I saw a large stone. Alara began to chant, her voice weaving a spell that seemed to calm the air around us. She poured a liquid from a vial onto the stone, and it began to glow with an ethereal light. "This is not witchcraft, Thomas," she said, turning to me. "This is a ritual to ward off the true evil that brings the plague. It is not the disease itself, but a supernatural force that feeds on fear and death." I was skeptical at first, but as I looked at the glowing stone, I felt a strange energy emanating from it. It was as if the forest itself was alive, watching us with an ancient wisdom. As we returned to the village, I realized that Alara was not just fighting against the plague, she was fighting against the darkness that had taken hold of the villagers' hearts. But it was a battle she might not win. The fear of death and the fear of being accused of witchcraft were intertwined, each feeding the other. The next day, the villagers, fueled by paranoia and desperation, marched to Alara's cottage. They accused her of witchcraft, demanding that she be punished. I tried to defend her, but my words fell on deaf ears. In the chaos, Alara was dragged away, taken to the town square for a trial. The trial was a sham, with the outcome already decided. Alara was found guilty, and as the sun began to set, she was led to the stake. I watched in horror as the flames engulfed her, feeling my heart burn with grief and anger. But as the fire consumed her body, something strange happened. The flames seemed to dance in a pattern, as if they were being controlled by an unseen force. And then they extinguished themselves, leaving behind only ashes and a faint glow. In the days that followed, the plague began to recede. The villagers, realizing too late their mistake, were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered community. I was left alone, haunted by the memory of Alara and the realization that she had been trying to save us all along. As I walked through the empty streets, I noticed something peculiar. The villagers who had accused Alara were now falling ill, one by one. It was as if the supernatural force she had tried to ward off had turned its attention to them. I understood then that Alara's ritual had not been in vain. She had given her life to protect us, to save us from a horror beyond our understanding. And in doing so, she had become a part of the very fabric of our village, a guardian against the darkness that lurked beyond the edge of reality. The fear of death still lingered, but it was no longer the only fear that gripped my heart. I feared the darkness that had consumed our village, the paranoia and ignorance that had led to Alara's demise. And I feared that I might never be able to escape the shadow of the plague, the haunting memory of a woman who had given everything to save us from ourselves. The echoes of no man's land. As I crouched in the muddy trenches, the stench of death and decay hung heavy in the air. The battlefield of Verdun was a place where hope went to die, where the screams of the wounded and the dying filled every waking moment. I was Lieutenant Michael Jenkins, a man worn down by the relentless brutality of war. My unit had been stationed here for months, and the constant barrage of artillery fire had become a numbing background noise to our existence. At first, it was just whispers. Soldiers would speak of seeing apparitions, ghostly figures of men who had fallen in battle. I dismissed these tales as the product of exhausted minds and the stress of combat. But as the days turned into weeks, the sightings became more frequent and more vivid. Men would report seeing their fallen comrades, standing just beyond the edge of the trenches, their eyes filled with a haunting longing. I saw them too, eventually. At first, it was just a glimpse out of the corner of my eye, a fleeting shadow that vanished when I turned to look. But as time passed, the apparitions became clearer, more defined. They were the faces of men I had known, men I had fought alongside, men I had watched die. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of death. It was the fear of being haunted by guilt. Every time I saw one of these ghosts, I felt a pang of responsibility, a sense that I had failed them in some way. But as the apparitions grew more aggressive, their presence no longer seemed benevolent. They began to move closer, their eyes burning with a malevolent intensity. One night, as we huddled in the trenches waiting for the dawn, I saw him, Sergeant Thompson, a man who had been like a brother to me. He stood just beyond the wire, his eyes fixed on me with a cold fury. I tried to speak, to reach out, but he vanished into the darkness, leaving me shaken and confused. The next day, we launched a futile attack across no man's land. The casualties were heavy, and as I stumbled back to our lines, I saw the ghosts again. This time, they were not just watching. They were moving, advancing towards us with a slow, relentless pace. It was then that I realized the horrifying truth. These ghosts were not here to comfort us. They were driven by a desire for revenge against the living. They blamed us for their deaths, for the futility of the war that had consumed them. And as I looked around at my comrades, I saw the fear in their eyes, the knowledge that we were not just fighting against the enemy, we were fighting against the vengeful dead. The days that followed were a blur of chaos and terror. The ghosts became more aggressive. Their presence felt everywhere. Men began to turn on each other, paranoia and fear driving them to madness. I knew I had to escape, to find a way out of this hellhole before it was too late. But as I looked out across the battlefield, I saw that there was no escape. The ghosts had us surrounded, their numbers growing with each passing moment. And then I saw him again, Sergeant Thompson, standing just beyond the wire, his eyes fixed on me with an unblinking stare. In that moment, I knew I was doomed. The ghosts would not rest until they had claimed us all, until we had joined them in their eternal march across no man's land. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of death. It was the fear of being haunted by guilt, of being consumed by the vengeful dead. As the artillery fire intensified and the world around me began to dissolve into chaos, I felt the ghosts closing in. I was trapped in a nightmare from which there was no awakening, a battlefield where the living were not welcome. And then everything went black. When I came to, I was lying in a field hospital, my wounds bandaged and my mind foggy. The war was over, the armistice signed, but the echoes of no man's land still haunted me. I knew that I would never be free from the ghosts of my fallen comrades, that they would haunt me forever, their eyes burning with a malevolent fury. The fear that I had faced on that battlefield was not just of death. It was the fear of being trapped in a cycle of guilt and revenge, forever bound to the vengeful dead. And as I looked around at the other survivors, I saw that they too were haunted, their eyes reflecting the same terror that I felt. We had survived the war, but we had not escaped its horrors. The ghosts of no man's land would follow us forever, a constant reminder of the tragedy and the terror that we had endured. And in the silence of the night, when the world was still, I could still hear their whispers, their footsteps echoing across the battlefield, a chilling reminder that some wounds never heal. The Isle of the Forgotten. I stood on the deck of my ship, the Maverick's Revenge, the endless expanse of the ocean stretched out before me like an unforgiving canvas. I was Captain James Blackwood, a man who had spent his life charting the unknown, driven by a thirst for adventure and discovery. My crew and I had been at sea for months, searching for a new trade route to the East Indies. The monotony of the voyage had begun to wear on us, but the promise of riches and glory kept our spirits high. One morning, as the sun rose over the horizon, we spotted land, a small, uncharted island that seemed to rise out of the sea like a ghostly apparition. The crew was abuzz with excitement as we altered course, eager to explore this mysterious place. I, however, felt a sense of unease, a nagging feeling that something was off. As we anchored in a secluded cove, the silence of the island enveloped us. The air was thick with an otherworldly stillness, and the trees seemed to lean in, as if listening to our every move. I led a party ashore, armed with muskets and a sense of caution. The island was dense with foliage, and the paths we carved through it seemed to twist and turn in impossible ways. At first, we found nothing but the remnants of an ancient civilization, crumbling ruins and artifacts that hinted at a long-forgotten culture. But as night began to fall, we heard the first signs of life. Whispers echoed through the trees, soft at first, then growing louder and more urgent. It was as if the island itself was warning us to leave. We set up camp, huddled around a fire that cast flickering shadows on the trees. The whispers grew clearer, and we began to make out words. Pleas for help, warnings of danger. It was then that we saw them, figures moving at the edge of the forest, their forms indistinct but their presence unmistakable. As the night wore on, the figures drew closer. We saw that they were human, or at least they had once been. Their bodies were twisted, their skin stretched over bones that seemed to be shifting, reforming into grotesque parodies of humanity. They moved with an unnatural gait, their eyes glowing with an ethereal light. We tried to defend ourselves, but these creatures were relentless. They seemed to be drawn to us, as if we were prey in a hunt. I realized then that we had stumbled into something ancient and malevolent, a curse that had transformed these humans into monsters. As we fled back to our ship, the creatures pursued us, their numbers growing with each passing moment. It was as if the island itself was spawning them, summoning forth an army of the damned to hunt us down. We set sail, but the creatures followed, their forms visible in the distance, swimming through the water with an unnatural ease. I knew then that we had to escape, to leave this accursed place behind. But as I looked back at the island, I saw something that chilled my blood. The creatures were not just following us, they were changing. They were becoming more human, their forms shifting back to what they once were. The realization hit me like a wave. These creatures were not monsters, they were victims. They had been transformed by an ancient curse, one that was slowly consuming them, erasing their humanity, and we, by coming to this island, had become part of their nightmare. As the days passed, we noticed changes in ourselves. Some of the crew began to act strangely, as if they were being pulled by an unseen force. They would wander off during the night, only to return with no memory of where they had been. I feared that the curse was spreading, that we were slowly losing our grip on reality. One night, I woke to find one of my men standing over me, his eyes glowing with the same ethereal light as the creatures. He was no longer human. He had been consumed by the curse. I knew then that we were doomed, that the island had claimed us as its own. In a desperate bid to save what was left of my crew, I ordered the ship to be set on fire. As the flames engulfed us, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We were escaping the curse, leaving behind the horrors of the island. But as I looked out at the sea, I saw them, the creatures, now fully human, standing on the shore, watching us burn. And in their eyes I saw a glimmer of recognition, a hint that they remembered who they once were. The fear that gripped my heart was not just of death, but of losing one's humanity. The island had shown me that the line between man and monster is thin, and that the unknown can consume us all. As the flames took me, I realized that some secrets are better left unexplored, and that the horrors we fear the most are often those that lurk within ourselves. The last thing I saw was the island, fading into the distance, its secrets and terrors locked within its ancient heart. And I knew that I would never be free from its grasp, that the curse of the island would haunt me forever, a reminder of the horrors that await us in the unknown.
Thanks for joining us in the shadows tonight. If you enjoyed these chilling tales, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more spine-tingling stories every week. Have you got a story of your own? Share it in the comments below. We love hearing from you. And remember, the darkness holds many secrets. Are you brave enough to uncover them? Until next time, keep your lights on and your doors locked. Sweet nightmares.